Good morning, friends. Do stay connected to the space that we're in. You're connected to your breath, connected to your body, connected to that space we've just opened up in us through the welcoming prayer that we've just experienced, that process of welcoming all that comes, letting go, opening to the love of God. Yes. So hang on to that. Pastor Sarah here to introduce our sermon time and the kickoff to our fall sermon series. So we do like to do sermon series here at Salt House, setting a larger focus for a measured amount of time. And we often use a video trailer to kind of capture that focus. And it's time to reveal it. So this is what our journey will be for the next 2-ish months and beyond it'll take us all the way up to Advent as we kick off December. Can you believe that we've been talking about that? So to set us up for our fall journey, as well as where we'll head today, here is our fall sermon series trailer. Perhaps the greatest purpose of our lives is love, which is what we here at Salt House try to figure out together. We're like a school of love, a community learning together how to live the love of Jesus, how to receive love, and how to give love. And not just love, but love. Contrary to what we're told and sold, love is not just a feeling. Love is not a thing, but love is a verb. You see, love is an actual practice, which is why here at Salt House we engage what we call our 7 core practices. 7 practices. They are actions we do together to practice love. These are practices we weave into how we spend our time together in Sunday morning worship, that focus our resources and staff, practices that structure our programs and ministry, shaping us in love. Our core practices help us practice love here, so we can practice love everywhere, in every relationship and place in our lives. So this fall, our Sunday mornings explore our current 7 core practices, which are engaging homelessness, hearing God, radical welcome, eating together, being changed, stories matter, living generously. These core practices are practices of love, practices we do together. So limber up, stretch out, and get ready as we explore together our Salt House core practices, because love is not a thing, it's not a feeling, but love is a verb. Yes, right? So excited for this journey. So at Salt House, we don't actually use the language of core values, but we often say instead core practices, things that we do. And we name them as practices because they are behaviors, they are actions, verbs. And how we came up with this list, they were not things that we put on like an aspirational list, like things that we hoped for, something we wrote out as what we believe or what we value. But as we launched as a church, and shaped our language and lived into what Sundays would look like and lived into all of our questions about how things would be and how we wanted to do them. And after doing life and worship and all of that together for about 2 years, we stopped and looked at what we do. And we noticed that these 7 things were at the core. They were central things that we practice together. So these are the 7 things that bubbled out then of our attempts to learn from and live the life of Jesus. These are Jesus practices. So yes, they are practices of love. And there are so many more practices of love than this, right? And I think our core practices, this list, it will expand and change over time. But this fall is a chance to stop and look around and talk about what is fueling our life together here at Salt House now. And not just as a way of being like, yay, Salt House, not for that kind of experience, but to use it really to say that this is a piece of how we live like Jesus. These are practices that are a way to actually live it. Let's see how we can do that love thing, because love is a verb. So each week this fall, we're going to explore one of our practices from various perspectives. And today we kick it all off with our Salt House core practice of engaging homelessness. For some context and history in this particular core practice, I'm just going to tell you briefly just pieces of that. So when we launched Salt House, we didn't plan for this. We didn't set an agenda to engage with the urgent need of homelessness on the east side of Seattle. But we did know that we wanted to listen to the needs of our neighborhood and wider community. And just a few months in, it was the summer of 2015, I got a phone call from some folks at Holy Family Catholic Church around the corner. Two of them wanted to come over and meet me. And so two folks from their staff came over. They brought some lunch, and we were sitting and getting to know each other. And just it came up in conversation casually that they just named, they had this social justice team that had been looking for a place to site a shelter for families experiencing homelessness. And I just said, well, we have this unfinished basement. And so we went downstairs into the musty concrete floors, cobwebs, the bare drywalls, and Andrea said, this could work. Then after a little bit of exploration about whether it would work and realizing that it could, a few months later, it was November 2015, our whole community of Salt House, about 30 of us at the time, we all gathered to make the decision of whether or not to give our basement to families experiencing homelessness. At the end of our honest conversation of pros and cons, our concerns, our hopes, we went around the room, and the entire circle, and every single person was asked just to check in about what they were thinking. And it was a unanimous yes. And just 1 year later, the new Bethlehem Day Center opened on November 6th, 2016. Since then, we have sold a sixth of our property to become a permanent 24-hour shelter for families and for women experiencing homelessness. So engaging homelessness, yes, that's a core practice for us. We put it into action. It's a verb. And with our Homelessness Thrive team, including the leadership of Kim Saunders initially and then Heather Preston most recently, we've continued to find ways to engage with our neighbors at the Day Center, including the welcome baskets, which we all have a chance to work with later today, and we'll hear more about in just a little bit. And as the Day Center will leave our basement next summer when the shelter is finished and built, and as that is completed, we will have so much opportunity to discern how we'll engage homelessness moving forward. I'm so, so grateful for where we have been with this and also for where we might head next. So today is about engaging homelessness. And the rest of our sermon time then is with Amber North. She began at the New Bethlehem Day Center from day one, originally as the case manager and now as the program manager. She's been here to Salt House before. She is a phenomenal human being who has studied philosophy and theology, and she puts all of that into action. She loves as a verb in her work at the Day Center. So we celebrate and explore this core practice of ours, love as a verb, by welcoming Amber North back to the Salt House microphone.
Oh, man. Look at this. Oh, gosh. Well, thank you, Sarah, for that very humbling and honoring introduction. Thank you to all of you for being here today to engage in this conversation. And thank you, Sarah, I want to say, for being, I think, a model to us all over this season as you have walked through this tough moment of recovery, for exhibiting so beautifully how it is possible to at once offer strong leadership and to do so at the same time, I think, while also offering up vulnerability and declaration of need. And that's powerful, and it's in fact part of the inspiration for what I'm going to be talking about today. And I just want to say I appreciate you and this congregation so much, and the way you have all continued to tackle moments of transition like this, of which I know we are all going through together as a family right now as we rise to this challenge of healing homelessness in our community. So it's an honor to be with you again and to get a chance to talk a little more about this. Before we get started, though, we're going to have a reading of the scripture.
This is a reading from the book of Isaiah, chapter 61, verses 1 through 3. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, and provide those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. The word of the Lord.
Thank you. Preview of what's to come. So over the last weeks, we have watched this property be transformed. As the early stages of construction and all the intensity and messiness and beauty of that have taken shape, we have, to put it bluntly, torn up the old. We've said goodbye to some well-loved trees and landscapes, and to a corner of this property used for many different groups for many different great things over the years. And we have begun the intense process of building something new. This building anew involves many moving pieces. The commingling of congregation members, construction workers, staff, and guests negotiating a very small shared parking lot. The exciting rumblings, sometimes very loud rumblings, of big important equipment doing big important things. And the moving around and leveling of more dirt than I ever imagined could fit in such a small space. And day by day, we see how this important work of tearing up is clearing and leading to an end goal on the horizon. The hope, the good news of something we can truly see and envision now, of a 24/7 facility that will serve homeless families and women. This is very exciting, so woohoo. And that's right, yes. And so I want to just first pause and say what a feat, and to say a big thank you to you all for the day-to-day of living through this with us, of sharing the home of your church and the patience that is needed to bring something like this into reality. This is something to continually call out and remember and celebrate. And so we have something special planned for you all today that I'll be coming back to and saying a little more about at the end of service, because we cannot say thank you enough. Yes. It truly is good news. For those of us who believe in the power of the teachings of Jesus, this is a phrase I think we're very familiar with, right? And so as I was thinking through what I wanted to speak on today, as we kick off your fall series, and as we also bring a series of telling the story of New Bethlehem through the stories of us all, as staff, guests, congregation members, and volunteers, to a close, I felt a pull to sit with that phrase and what it deeply means and invites. As was read at the beginning of service, perhaps the most notorious passage for this phrase is in Isaiah 61, which is a famous prophecy of the Messiah. So famous that Jesus significantly and controversially refers to this passage again in Luke 4 when he is in Nazareth. Jesus pauses and points to the passage in the scroll, claiming his fulfillment of it. And this is the often referred to mic drop moment, if you will, of Jesus claiming his vocation as Messiah. This is what Jesus is here for. It is to deliver this message as reality. So again, let's read this good news and what it actually says and who it is for. And I quote, as was read earlier, "The Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted." And as Jesus rephrases this last line in Luke 4, "He has sent me to proclaim release of the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, and to let the oppressed go free." Wow. Right? This is a promise, and it is also a clear declaration of the purpose, the work that Jesus came for and his followers are to be engaged in. And this is a work that I think is at once general and universal. It is a recognizing for us all and in us all that there is a binding up of our wounds. There is a dignity and a lightness of being. There is a freedom away from external things of this world that cannot be taken away from any one of us. And this is the part of the good news I think we are a little more used to knowing and sharing. But this work is also very specific. It is a call for us to participate in and co-create the world that the God of this universe is for. This work is not done, and it is calling us today to create a kingdom for the poor, where the oppressed are truly and radically free. Both of these calls, the general and the specific, I think, are calls to action in a way. And they are also connected. And we can see so clearly why, I think, when we turn to the issue of homelessness specifically. Over the last months, you've gotten to hear stories of different members of our community. You got to hear from Andrew, our case manager, and about his profound journey here from Rwanda to Uganda to Maine to the Dakotas to Washington State, and many of the different injustices he has walked through and experienced, and how that informs his service and why he does what he does today. And you also heard from Hyla, our former guest, current friend, volunteer, and I just say overall kind of rock star of New Bethlehem, and heard about her journey and what brought her and her girls to living in the car, and also what brought them to their new home and the profound message they have now to share with the world. And so on this theme, I will share just a little part of my own story. The piece that is hard to tell, honestly, but it is also important for what brought me to this work. And that was a shipwreck moment, if you will, in my own story. It was a moment where I found myself on the roof of a building in my late 20s, considering taking my own life. It was a moment that felt, for various reasons, very hopeless. Like everything was lost, and I had screwed up everything beyond what could be mended. There was a long relationship with a partner that I had deeply loved that came to a crashing end. There was a little bit of a health crisis I was not sure I could solve. There was the end point to a career I could feel was coming, and a hard decision to walk away that had to be made. There was a mounting of student and credit card debt that I wasn't sure I could ever get out from under. And there were so many communities and friendships I was afraid to reveal the truth of how I was actually doing and then maybe ultimately lose. And so there I was, unsure of my future, of any future at all. And when I finally chose to safely climb down, there was a hard, long slog, one day at a time. There was a moving home. There was a surrender and a seeking of help. And there was the rebuilding of life, friends, and stability. And as I was going through this, particularly in the days that all I could do was go to therapy, I also saw so many others going through pain around me, especially here on the streets in King County. Often our eye contact would affirm that our pain was shared, but also that our situation wasn't. It became glaringly clear to me that I was so easily could have been, in many ways had become homeless, and yet I also couldn't have been. And both of those are really important. I had a family I could lean on. And since they're actually here in the audience, I just need to take this moment to name and express immense gratitude to my parents who are sitting in the corner there that are the reason I'm here, guys. So, yeah. I also had an education in my back pocket. I had a whiteness. I had a childhood neighborhood full of support. I had opportunities that would be out there available to me over and over again when I was ready for them. And a variety of other things from the deck of cards of life that gave me a place to land. This was something I could not unsee, and I knew I wanted to be a part of creating a place to land for others. And this is what led me here to you all, for which I am so grateful. And I have had the privilege of bearing witness to what a difference a place like that can make. Time and time again, I have watched families slowly walk out from chapters of desolation to new chapters of stability. Each person I sit with has a story that is unique, but there are also some things in common. You got to see some of these things in the web that Hyla shared with us in her talk. Divorce, abuse, trauma, medical crisis, depression, lost jobs, a minimum wage that simply does not cover raising a family, childhood wounds, neighborhoods of poverty traps and cycles, racism, discrimination, broken criminal justice, the barrier of a record, the challenges of immigration, the threats of deportation, addiction as medication for a day-to-day that is too painful to bear. To sum it up, as I often hear from guests, it's just a load of shit. Sorry, no better word. That feels impossible sometimes to untangle. I have also watched folks' faces who come in with this heavy load of burdens, though, slowly lightened. As one guest, a guest that had dealt with it all, the fleeing of domestic violence and the exhausting outrunning of all kinds of trauma, put it to me, and I will never forget this. When you have been in survival mode so long, to come to a place where you can stand still and actually physically breathe deeply for the first time without the world and people pulling at your back, that's when things begin to change. And I have watched over and over as that change, that deep breath, gives way to the hard work of folks building anew. Because let us not forget, as Bill and Katrina wonderfully put it at the groundbreaking, the hardest work by far is being done by the people who are actually experiencing homelessness. But who is to say who is most deserving of this newness? I think the conversation around homelessness in our culture and in the Pacific Northwest especially has reached some dangerous heights. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of anxiety and fear and confusion around the unknown. And in reaction, even those of us who want to be a part of the solution can at times, with the best of intentions, I think, find ourselves putting folks in overly simplified boxes. There are the folks who are on drugs and intense in the parks in Seattle, we say, and then there are the families working hard on the east side. Or we say, there are the folks struggling with mental health, but then there are the folks who experienced a medical crisis or lost job. Sometimes I hear this honestly, even from guests, as well as advocates and community members. This kind of merit-based thinking is such a deep part of our DNA in American culture. It is natural for us to skip over the web. But what cause comes first? What cause is most valid? Whose story is more worthy of that deep breath kind of freedom Jesus said was the good news? There are some really important truths in these comments, and I encourage us to tell the more story. There is so much more than the stereotypes and the images that are coming out of the conversation. So please, let's share that more story. Let's shout it from the rooftops, in fact. Let's brag on our amazing families of New Bethlehem. Let's let people know Seattle is also being reborn. But let's not forget the bigger picture. Let's not forget the larger systemic injustices, the stack of cards dealt so unequally that we are woven into all our messy stories. And let us not forget who Jesus walked with, whether it was the woman at the well, the tax collectors, the lepers, the criminals. He spoke up for all people. He spoke up for these people. And Jesus did so, I think, because all of them in their different ways, they were all experiencing a world deeply unfree. In many cases, they were also literally unfree, as slaves in the Roman Empire. But let us be under no illusion that this is not the world we also live in today. We live in a society right now that is deeply economically unequal and where there are cycles of poverty nearly unbreakable. In a culture where there are now more black men incarcerated than there were enslaved in 1850. In a world with broken infrastructure where some of the most basic human needs are not always met. In a country where a whole population that was once brought over here intentionally to work our fields at low or no wages are now struggling in cages at our border. And we live in a society where people are shooting each other in the streets and where people are harmed for the color of their skin, who they love, or what they believe. I believe that is when this kind of world collides with the human story and all its natural transition, its difficult ebbs and flows. That is when we get the mass suffering we can now name as the homelessness crisis. And so it is this kind of world that the good news asks us to respond to and to change. This is in many ways overwhelming. I know. We all feel that. But this is why I think, to return to our message from the beginning, the good news starts and has to start with that general and universal message. The message that we are not in this fight alone. That is the message that there is a present incarnational reality of a divine within us all, moving ahead of us, and that cannot be taken away. A love that exceeds the infinite iterations of us and them, past our ineptness, and binds up our wounds, and is on the side of change. It is only when we embrace this truth, I think, that real liberation becomes in reach. Because it is a liberation we build all together with one another, and with this love at the helm, echoing your series. There is also more power in this way of seeing. As Indigenous Australian activist Lilia Watson puts it, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. To drive this point home, I'd like to end with a video that was very impactful for me in my journey toward this kind of understanding. It is from the film The Greatest Showman. I believe it may have been shown here before a while back, but it is worth seeing again. Yeah. And the context of this video is a singer, a wonderful, now famous singer, Keala Settle, who was commissioned to sing a song for the workshop of the film that would either get it greenlit or not. At the time, the singer was less well-known and had her own insecurities with the responsibilities that came with this workshop. The song was also written very close to the actual day, and the commission to sing it pressed upon her late in the game, adding extra pressure. And furthermore, it was written as the centerpiece for the supposed misfits that the movie is dedicated to, the, quote, freaks of the circus. She was not sure she was up to it and felt the overwhelming nature of this task. But as she performed the song, the power of its message came through. And before I say anything more about it, let's just roll it. Oh gosh, guys, the change this world needs is overwhelming. But there is so much good news, so much of it. What I love about this video is that the need for healing, for hope, for radical freedom and acceptance, it's so clearly universal. You can see it on everyone's faces in that room. That's why the video has 45 million views. I'm only 1,000 of those, don't worry. Yeah. The good news is that this kind of freedom is possible. That was the promise of Jesus. And it's possible because the good news is that each of our stories, each of our deep needs for healing is what we have to give to one another. These are our bridges to one another and to that more just world. When we embrace the good news, the divine and love in each and every one of us, then we slowly chip away at the systemic injustice and prejudice. We slowly chip away at a world that says not everyone has a right to joyfully and powerfully say with liberation, "This is me." Sometimes I think we resort to the simplistic boxes rather than embracing this work, because at the end of the day, it requires vulnerability. It requires seeing that we all have our good and bad choices. We all have things that we did and things that happened to us. And we all have needs in our areas where we need help. We all have scars that make us human. But we are not alone in this fight. Our vulnerability does not go in vain. The divine is on our side, and so are brothers and sisters. We are invited to step up together as advocates, as volunteers, as voters, and sometimes just as human beings, that, as Hyla so beautifully put it, like a dog smelling each other's butts, not literally, can joyfully and simply say hello. I'm going to tell you right now, this community is doing just that. You have chosen to not accept the status quo. You have chosen to tear up the old ways, to level the dirt, and build anew. And you have chosen to create a place where we witness this kind of deep breath, shackles-free, this is me, liberation, in all kinds of people every day. So thank you and bless you. May the months ahead be filled with joy and celebration as the vision of this shared project comes to its full fruition. And may the homelessness in your story, wherever it may lie, wherever you are today, find peace, so that you might continually, powerfully respond to this good news. Very good news. Thank you.